Imagine this: two Canadian school teachers, a tiny boat named Flying Fish, and the wild, untamed beauty of Fiji during Christmas break. What starts as a simple weekend trip to the island of Beqa, known for its firewalkers and legendary fishing spots, quickly turns into an unforgettable adventure. With a pair of fearless Fijian crewmates and a bold spirit for exploration, they set sail for sun, sea, and a little thrill-seeking. But when the waters reveal a terrifying and unexpected foe, their holiday escape transforms into a test of courage, quick thinking, and survival. Get ready for a tale of daring, danger, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of the unknown in A Fight with a Stingray by Charles R. Marlett.
Near Viti Levu, the largest island of the Fiji group, is situated a smaller and more rocky island known as Beqa. It lies about 25 miles from Suva, the beautiful capital of the group, and makes a delightful rendezvous for a day's outing. This location is a popular destination for picnics and excursions due to its natural beauty, numerous charming camping spots, and several one-of-a-kind attractions. Hidden away on the island of Beqa lives a tribe of Fijians possessing an extraordinary gift: the ability to walk barefoot across red-hot stones. For a small fee, these firewalkers will demonstrate their remarkable skill to curious tourists. However, it's not just this thrilling spectacle that draws visitors from Suva. The rocky shores of Beqa are renowned for offering the best fishing in the region, a treasure trove for anglers. Intrigued by tales of the firewalkers' bravery and the island's legendary fishing spots, I decided to embark on a journey to Beqa. I was determined to witness the truth behind these captivating stories for myself. I was engaged at the time in teaching a small native school near the capital, and so had all day Saturday and Sunday in which to do as seemed best to myself. There was another young man, Harry Menzies by name, also a Canadian, who was engaged in the same occupation farther out from the city, and he and I were somewhat chummy, having nationality and occupation in common. Moreover, we were both enthusiastic lovers of the water, and owned together a little cutter which we called the Iki Vuka, or Flying Fish. Neither of us had ever been to Beqa, but had always intended to pay it a visit before we left the islands, which we contemplated doing that Christmas. As it was now, only a few weeks before the time set for our departure, we arranged to make the excursion the following week, starting on the next Saturday morning and returning on the Sunday afternoon following. For the proper management of the Iki Vuka, 2 more of the crew were necessary, and, as it is always best on an excursion of this kind to have 1 or more native boys with you, we agreed to each take our regular native helpers along, as they were both experts in the arts of swimming, diving, and sailing. On Friday evening we packed up enough food to last us, and this, with a tent and a couple of hammocks, we placed in the boat. We also got ready an outfit of tackle, lines, hooks, net, and lastly a harpoon, which would be handy in case a shark got tangled up in our net. These we entrusted to the 2 boys, with instructions to have all in readiness for an early start next morning. The wind in the morning was light, and so we barely drifted along over the tranquil water. But when we got outside the reef that runs around the island, we found a better breeze, which in about 3 hours wafted us to our destination. We had been longer on the way than we had expected, and so it was about noon when we pulled into a little landlocked bay and prepared to pitch our camp in the shade of a coconut grove, which extended down to the water's edge. While the boys were erecting the tent, swinging the hammocks, and preparing the dinner, Harry and I went for a stroll along the beach. Returning to the camp, we found that the natives had done excellently well in the way of preparing a meal, and the camp looked deliciously cool and inviting. After eating, we had a short siesta, and then set out on a 2-mile walk to see the firewalkers, who were performing that afternoon for the benefit of a party of tourists, on a visit to Beqa in search of new scenes and excitement. The practice of firewalking as performed by these islanders seems a wonderful act, and is explained by them to their credulous fellows by a long and very ancient myth concerning a befriended deity who gratefully bestowed the art on their ancestors. Stones were heated to whiteness, and when the fire was taken away, the natives sprang barefooted upon them, and shaking their spears and clubs, performed a sort of war dance, which, however, did not last long, for as soon as the stones began to cool to a sullen red glow, they quickly made their exit from the scene. After this performance was over, we made our way back to the camp, and, as evening was approaching, prepared to spend a short time in fishing, leaving Tomasi, one of the boys, to prepare the supper. We rowed off in our tiny dory and set our net across the mouth of a little creek that ran into the sea, not far from the place which we had selected as a camping spot. When the net was satisfactorily placed, we put out our trolls, and Tarago, the second boy, took charge of the oars. The evening was glorious, and the fish did their best to make the time pass pleasantly. We soon had enough and pulled back to camp. After supper had been served, we should have liked to have gone for a swim, but our presence had attracted an undesirable, curiosity-stricken visitor to the neighborhood, and the appearance of a long black fin gliding slowly back and forth in the limpid water warned us to stay on shore. When the quick, short twilight of the tropics was over, and the white moon shed her beams over the landscape, we lay and smoked our pipes, listening to the beat of a lily in some distant village and the sound of the wavelets on the beach. The next morning we rose before sunrise and prepared for the day's sport. After partaking of a rather light repast, which the two boys had prepared, we took the dory, and all four of us set out for the spot where we had set the net the day before. As we approached the place, we could tell from the commotion in the water that some larger game than we had bargained for had got into the flimsy prison during the night. Our first thought, of course, was of sharks. These terrible creatures, so numerous in the tropics, are the scourge of all who have anything to do with the sea. They prevent sea bathing, they strike terror to all who are unluckily capsized into the water, and they seriously trouble the fishermen. Now, the natives of the South Sea Isles are the best swimmers and divers in the world. An islander armed only with a sharp, strong knife will dive into the water and do battle with a shark or other large fish in its own element without any fear. Only the great sting-a-ree or stingray do they hesitate about attacking. To clear the net of the unwelcome visitor, I told Tomasi to dive and kill the creature, whatever it was, before it made useless strings of our net. The boy promptly took up his knife. He unhesitatingly slid into the water as noiselessly as an eel. Tomasi was an expert diver, and had often done the same thing for us before, so that we felt no anxiety on his behalf. When, however, after a lapse of 2 or 3 minutes he did not reappear, Harry began to get uneasy, fearing that the boy had got tangled up in the meshes of the net. Just then, a dark red stain appeared on the surface of the water, spreading itself slowly over the place where the shiny brown body of the boy had disappeared. Surely, we thought, it was the blood of the shark, and we waited anxiously for Tomasa's reappearance. As we watched a long, flexible object whip suddenly out of the water, and falling across the net, cut it as if it were a cobweb. Instead of a shark, he had met with the dreaded stingray, more dangerous far than any shark that haunts the seas. The long, flexible tail of this terrible creature is armed with 2 sickle-like spines, sharp as the keenest razors, and forming the animal's only weapon of offense and defense. With lightning-like rapidity, the fish can deliver an unerring slash, cutting a deep gash in the flesh of whatever it comes into contact with. I looked at the other Fijian. His face was a blue and horrible color, and his teeth chattered with fear. Not so Harry. He was busily engaged in getting ready the harpoon that we had brought along in case of just some such emergency as now confronted us. Meanwhile, the great ray was rushing backwards and forwards against the net, trying to free himself from the meshes that enveloped him. These fish, by the way, are noted for an incomprehensibly fiendish temper, waiting no cause of attack and never knowing when they are beaten. Every moment his actions became more and more agitated and excited, as he worked himself up to a greater pitch of fury. Harry cast the harpoon twice unsuccessfully, but the third time he struck the brute fair and square in the middle of his broad, round back, where the lance buried its point a foot deep in the cartilaginous flesh. The effect of this painful stab seemed to be to draw the creature's attention to the boat, for with one mad rush he burst through the battered remains of the net and made a swift charge right at us. With the speed of an express train he came, gathering momentum at every foot and hurling the water to right and left in masses of foam till he struck us fair and hard, so that the little boat shook and careened over till I thought she would capsize. Then the harpoon line, which was fast to the gunwale in the bow, tightened with a twang, and we started through the water at a speed that the Iki Vuka at her best had never rivaled. But the mad demon at the other end of the line could not stand the strain, and suddenly the line slackened, and we ceased to move. Harry sat in the bows intently watching for the next move of the troublesome creature, when suddenly, as I watched him, he crouched low in the bottom of the dory and shouted to us to do the same. Then, with a swish and a sprinkle of salty water, a dark form of great size shot clean over the dory, the end of the terrible tail dragging across the thwarts as it took the water at the other side. Without pausing, the fish turned again immediately and made straight at us. Like a torpedo he came, swimming almost on the surface, and I shall never forget the horror I experienced as he charged down upon us. Suddenly, there was a violent collision, a crash, and we were in the water with him. What the hell? When I came to the surface, I realized the imminent peril of the situation and the necessity for getting away from the dangerous neighborhood of that deadly tail as soon as possible. Accordingly, I took a long, deep dive towards the cutter, which was anchored not far from the scene of this strange combat. I came to the surface twice in the intervening 50 yards, and then pulled myself quickly on board. Harry's evasion tactics were similar, but in his desperation to get away, he overcompensated and took a dive that carried him too far, unexpectedly passing directly under the cutter. So it happened that, just as I was pulling myself up on one side, he appeared on the other, and we both scrambled aboard at the same time. Once safely out of danger, we looked around on the scene of the late accident. A few planks floating around the broken hull of the dory were all that was to be seen. But as we watched, a broad, black, shiny back appeared in their midst. The terrible tail lashed the water furiously for a few seconds. And then slowly the big body turned over on its back and showed us a deep, long gash on the glistening white belly. Evidently Tarago had dived under the monster and given it a mortal wound with his knife. We looked round to see what had become of the brave boy. We had no fear for his personal safety, for he could have dived to the shore without any difficulty under ordinary circumstances. Happening to glance in the direction of the spot where the net had been set, I saw him swimming towards us, bearing the unconscious Tomasi with him.
Oh shit!
We pulled them aboard in a hurry. Tarago appeared none the worse for his adventure, but the other boy was in a very bad state, having received a deep wound on the thigh which had laid the flesh open to the bone, and had caused the poor fellow to bleed almost to death. As quickly as possible we got under way, and shortly after sunrise, we were headed back to Suva before a fair breeze, with Tarago curled up in the bows, and Tomasi bearing his suffering stoically. Harry and I sat in the stern, and talked over the adventure, especially that part of it in which Tarago had shown such great bravery and presence of mind. It had been a great tax on the boy's nerves and strength, first to kill the ferocious monster with no weapon but his knife, and then to swim to the rescue of his companion, whom he knew to be either wounded or dead. And now he lay quietly sleeping, taking a well-earned rest, while the Iki Vuka swiftly bore his wounded companion homewards. After we had got well under way, Harry had stopped the flow of blood by a hastily made tourniquet, tying a handkerchief around the limb above the wound and tightening it with a stick. Although poor Tomasi was not groaning or complaining of the pain he was suffering terribly, for his face was a sickly, ashy color, and he seemed to sink into a sort of stupor as the time went by. When, 2 hours later, we pulled into Suva, he was still alive, though quite unconscious. After committing him to the doctor's care, and doing all in our power to see that he was made comfortable, we had to set out for Beqa again, to secure the remainder of our camping outfit. It was mid-afternoon when we reached the island on the second trip, and after hastily gathering up our belongings, we set out to see what had become of the body of the horrible creature who had spoiled our day's sport at such great risk to our lives and property. The sharks had partly demolished the great body before it drifted into shallow water near the shore, but the long, leathery tail had proved too tough even for a hungry shark, and as it was still intact I cut it off and took it home, to preserve as a souvenir of the adventure. We measured the great ray across its broad back, and found it to be a trifle over 8 feet wide, while the length was slightly greater, though in shape the fish is almost round. The tail was 10 feet long, and tapered away as slim as a whiplash. It is covered with tiny spines, only one, or at most two, of which fortunately develop into the terrible knife-like appendages which had proved so disastrous to Tomasi. As Harry and I stood on the deck of the homeward-bound liner that Christmas and took our last look at the green hills of Viti-Levu and the fast-receding pier, we saw two figures, one of which flourished a crutch, while the other, supporting him, found time with his free hand to wave a signal of farewell. It was the newly convalescent Tomasi and his brave friend Turago, having their last look at the two white men who had shared such a terrible experience with them.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this tale, please show your support by liking and subscribing to the Bug-Eyed Tales channel.